Okay, so now we're going to talk about supertypes and subtypes. These are another special way of differentiating entities. Again, not as common as just seeing just a regular strong entity without any funky little extra symbols and stuff. But these do happen quite a bit. They do happen, so you do need to be able to recognize them, and then you need to be able to recognize when you need to make them. So a subtype is exactly what it sounds like. It is when you have an entity that has special characteristics for just some of the group. The supertype is what you call the rest over bit, the main part of the entity that has everything that's in common between the different subtypes. So an example that you can think of would be all the student body at SPU, right? We have differences between the undergrads and the grads. But most of the information that we share is probably the same. Everyone has a student ID number. We have names and addresses. We have transcripts that are in existence. We've got, I don't know, there's a lot of information that the school carries, right? But grad students don't have dorms, right? So that might be something that would be part of a subtype for an undergrad student that a grad student wouldn't have. And so when you have a big table like that and you have differences between groups, you can split them out. That way, you can have a relationship. Some relationships need to go to all students, so it needs to be attached to the supertype. But you can also have a relationship that's just associated with just one subtypes, right? So if dorms was part of the thing associated with being an undergrad, then we could split off and have a little table for our dorms and assign our dorm rooms there. And then we don't have that option for the grad students because we don't have those. Instead, we have grad school housing. So that would be associated with just that subtype. So it's important to know that supertypes and subtypes have one-to-one relationships with each other. They are all full entities, so they will get their own tables later in the physical schema. And the notation for these are really important to pay attention to. So I think it's easy to remember to do the little circle because we usually have a shape when we have like lines and stuff going around. But the little rounded arrow things, that's the part that's really easy to forget to do. But they're really important because they show us what direction it goes, because your entity isn't going to be labeled supertype, right? And there's no special indication on the entity itself. So those little arrow things tell us what direction it's going. So if you have your supertype on the left and your subtypes on the right, we can still follow the little arrows and know exactly what's going on in your table. Okay, so let's look at some examples and get a little bit better grasp on this. So here we have employees. If you've ever worked for a company, you'll know that hourly employees and salary employees and consultants are treated very differently, at the very least in their hourly or the way that they're paid, right? So some people get hourly rates, some people have annual salaries, and stock options, probably health benefits, all sorts of stuff, right? And so there's gonna be sometimes when you need to call up the table for just the hourly employees and you don't need to worry about everybody else. And there's sometimes when you need to get at just the salaried employees and not everybody else. But all of the employee types are going to have their employee name, employee number, the address, date hired, etc. So everything on the top supertype table also applies to the lower subtypes. Okay, and an occurrence of subtype is also an occurrence of the supertype. right? So a consultant is still a type of employee because it is a subtype of that larger group. Okay, so this is called attribute inheritance. Okay, so here we have another example looking at a hospital. And here you can see a patient. All patients have IDs and admin dates. All of them are cared for by a responsible physician. All physicians have IDs. Physicians can care for many patients, but each patient only has one responsible physician. But you can see that, so that applies to all patients. But resident patients need to have beds. Outpatients don't. And so because there's this systematic difference, we can split them out into subtypes. And so the bed is only associated with the resident patients, and the outpatients instead have check back dates instead of date discharge. So there's slight differences in those. So it is important to know that there does have to be different attributes associated with them in order to make them subtypes. But you can do this really cool thing of just associating with certain things. Point to think about when you're creating these kind of things, not really just these things, but just a reminder to think about what you're doing when you're creating these one-to-many or one-to-one type relationships. So here, it's kind of obvious that one bed is assigned to one resident patient, and each patient is assigned one bed. Our patients are going to be sharing beds. That's fairly obvious. But if you think about, I know I said I wouldn't try to use the COVID stuff too much as examples, but think about the respirators. Normally, only one patient is assigned that piece of equipment, but they found out that they could actually share the respirators between patients. I bet you the way that they assigned these respirators probably didn't make that assumption, because that's not something we've ever done in the past. So their equipment probably looked like this, where it had an optional one, but they ended up having to have a many relationship. So it's kind of interesting to think about what they might have had to do on the back end in order to make that fix, which is not super related to resident patients and supertypes, subtypes, but just something that I thought of when I was looking at this particular example. Back to the topic at hand. So you see that the attributes apply to some but not all instances of the entity type, and instances of subtype participate in a relationship that is unique to that subtype.